I'm Nick Nisley, and I serve as the president of Northwestern Michigan College. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to extend a warm Traverse City welcome to all of tonight's attendees, whether you're here in person or attending virtually. I'm especially excited about tonight's Freshwater focus. It's an intersectional space. It's bringing together our International Affairs Forum with the work of NMC's Great Lakes Water Studies Institute. I hope everyone enjoyed the reception breakout presentations and the opportunity to connect with our own NMC Great Lakes Water Studies Institute, and hopefully an opportunity for you to get to connect also with Interlochen Public Radio's Points North podcast team. I'm especially proud of NMC's commitment to educating and training the next generation of Great Lakes stewards, water researchers, and technicians. And I'm especially proud of our area's commitment to stewardship of our environment via the committed nonprofit sector and all of our area's committed volunteers and generous benefactors. On a personal note, let me share, I was disappointed that I couldn't attend last night's screening of Lindsay Haskins' Relentless documentary, as I have a personal connection. In the summer of 1985, heading into my sophomore year of undergraduate studies, I had an internship with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I fondly recalled to Mike Leonard that it was the best job of my life. And Mike quickly corrected me, saying, "Nick, it better be the second best job you've ever had." That job involved putting on a pair of hip waders every morning and walking every tributary of Lake Champlain in Vermont, New York, and Quebec. I spent the summer doing sea lamprey habitat and population surveys and actually mapping lamprey nesting sites. Imagine that, a whole summer walking Lake Champlain's tributaries and getting paid for it. Continuing with this sense of gratitude, I'd like to begin by offering a land acknowledgement. As the International Affairs Forum brings us together tonight to discuss the Great Lakes and their waterways, we acknowledge the history and ongoing presence of the Anishinaabeg people in our region, the Odawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi. We recognize that the land where Grand Traverse, Leelanau, and Antrim counties are situated is the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Anishinaabe people, today represented by the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians and the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians. We honor the Anishinaabe people as the traditional stewards of the land and water and acknowledge the enduring relationship between them and their traditional territories. In closing, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention IAF's membership appeal will be occurring later next month and into June. So please be watching your inbox. You obviously believe in the power of IAF as a platform for convening around important topics like tonight's. So if you're not already, I hope you'll show your vital support with membership and maybe annual giving. Again, welcome and enjoy. Now let me invite David Peck to come to the podium. David serves as IAF's Academic World Quest Coordinator. David.
Thank you, President Nisley. Good evening. My name is David Peck, and I am the Academic World Quest Coordinator for the International Affairs Forum at Northwestern Michigan College. Academic World Quest is a program of the World Affairs Council of America, also known as WACA, and its affiliate member councils, including the IAF. WACA's flagship youth education program is a fun, fast-paced team competition for high school students across the United States. Academic World Quest tests players' knowledge of current international politics, geography, global economics, history, and world cultures. This test is a challenge even to the most learned adults. More importantly, however, it opens up a global perspective for young minds to begin to understand and appreciate the beauty and complex nature of global relationships. The International Affairs Forum hosted its 11th annual Academic World Quest regional competition this last February on the 22nd, 2024 at Northwestern Michigan College. 93 students from 7 area high schools competed this year, and that was by far the largest AWQ event in Northern Michigan history. However, we look forward to surpassing these numbers at our event at the Haggerty Center next year with teams across Northern Michigan region. IAF will be sending this year's winning team, Quiz Pro Quo, of Traverse City Central High School to Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning at 4 in the morning, so please forgive them if they need to leave a little bit early, for the Carlos and Malu Alvarez Academic World Quest National Competition hosted by the World Affairs Council of America. This trip is a life-changing experience in our nation's capital for 4 promising young students. Academic World Quest and the students' trip is made possible by IAF members, individual donors, and dedicated volunteers. Thank you so very much for your gifts of support, your time, and your energy. We want to be sure to gratefully acknowledge our event MC, Mark Shillette of 7 and 4 News, our long-running lunch sponsor, Josh and Deanna Russell from Jimmy John's, and our media sponsor, the Traverse City Record Eagle, and our many prize donors who made so many students feel like winners that day. In particular, however, thank yous go out to those of you whose financial support funds the Washington, D.C. trip, so that these outstanding students can participate on the national level beginning tomorrow. Academic World Quest fundraising is ongoing throughout the entire year. Please watch for another Giving Tuesday in November, which will help us foster growth of this phenomenal Northern Michigan program for our high school students. And so with that, representing the International Affairs Forum, Michigan, Traverse City, and Traverse City Central High School, our students Jackson Price, and you can please stand when I say your name, Jackson Price, Madeline George, Ava Shotwell, and Nate Brewer. Their advisor and chaperone this year is Traverse City Central's teacher, Mr. John Failer. Now, there must be something in the water at Traverse City Central because this is Traverse City Central's 2nd year in a row earning a 1st place, and they won 2nd place this year as well. So are we in the midst of a dynasty? Stay tuned to 2025. I would like to introduce Ms. Madeline George to say a few words regarding the Academic World Quest and why it's such an important program to continue and how it is supporting her future endeavors. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ms. Madeline George.
Hello, my name is Madeline George, and I'm a senior at Central High School. On behalf of our team, I'd first like to thank the International Affairs Forum for sponsoring and supporting us and for providing this incredible opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. For as long as I can remember, I have been interested in public policy and government. From a young age, my family instilled in me the importance of being aware of the world around me and encouraged me to always be an active member of society. In recent years, I have learned about and gotten more interested in international relations. Studying how countries cooperate and interact directly impacts each and every one of us in our daily lives, through issues like the environment, tariffs and trade, and worldwide peace. Academic World Quest allowed me to delve further into these interests, which I am grateful for. Next year, I plan to immerse myself even more in international affairs and understanding them, as I will be continuing my education at Michigan State University's James Madison College, their residential school of public affairs and international relations. During my time there, I plan to major in social relations and policy, learning about issues and relationships between various groups around the world and how they influence both domestic and international policy. I also plan on minoring in French and hope to spend a semester abroad, learning directly hands-on other countries' policies and current events. Although I am still unsure of a specific career path, I know I am interested in a life of public service. I hope to devote myself to bettering America and the world for future generations to come. Once again, thank you. We're grateful for this opportunity to go to Washington, D.C.
Well, good evening, everybody. Now it's time for the main event. My name is Mike Leonard. I'm the co-chair of the International Affairs Forum. Before Before I kick off, though, I just want to say thank you to our students. If you do have to slip out, because it is a 4 a.m. call, you know, I think you get a hall pass on that one, so we understand. But if you can stick around to listen to Peter Annin, I'm sure that you will, particularly for our sophomore in this group, you may actually pick up a fact that will allow you to continue that dynasty next year as you participate in the academic world quest. Before we begin, please use this opportunity to silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Tonight, as you've already heard, is the second half of our double feature on water. Last night, many of you enjoyed watching the documentary Relentless, produced and directed by IAF's own Lindsay Haskin, and Lindsay is here tonight with his partner Paula. So thank you for continuing on and joining us, Lindsay. This evening, we are joined by another incredible water expert. You possibly heard Peter Annin earlier this week on Interlochen Public Radio. Peter is the director of the Mary Griggs Burke Center for Freshwater Innovation and the author of The Great Lakes Water Wars. It is considered the definitive work on the Great Lakes water diversion controversy. Before coming to Northland College in 2015, Peter served as a reporter at Newsweek, the Associate Director of the Institute of Journalism and Natural Resources, and the Managing Director of the University of Notre Dame's Environmental Change Initiative. He continues to report on the Great Lakes water diversion. Peter holds a BA in journalism from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, an MIA from Columbia University, and an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Northland College. Peter will take questions, and this is important because it's a change. Peter will take questions from the audience at the end of this talk. Cards are being handed out now, so you can jot down your questions. If you're a student, please put student at the top of the card. We are first and foremost an educational arm of NMC and want your voices heard. This presentation is brought to you by IAF members and with the great support of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, who understand and teach all of us that the balance of nature is a tenuous thing and that we can never take her for granted. We acknowledge that this college and our communities rest on the ground their ancestors owned and lived on for thousands of years. Thank you, and miigwech. Promotional support comes from the finest public radio station on the planet, Interlochen Public Radio, and the Traverse City Record Eagle. Both are terrific examples of local journalism and are necessary for an informed public. Now, please join me in welcoming Peter Annin to the IAF stage.
Thanks, Mike, for that kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. I want to also thank Alex Tank for his hospitality and the invitation to be with you this evening. I always start my talks with an audience poll gauging the Great Lakesness of my audiences. And we're going to have the lights come up a little bit. And it's a little quick stand-up, sit-down thing. And it may seem a little bit silly at first, but hang with me here. So everyone stand up who has visited at least one North American Great Lake, which should be everybody because there's one right outside the door. Okay, so remain standing if you've visited 2 North American Great Lakes. Not a surprise in the state of Michigan. Remain standing if you've visited 3, 4, and all 5. All right, very good, we're not done. Stand if you have immersed yourself in at least one North American Great Lake. Accidental, intentional, doesn't matter. Okay, remain standing if you've immersed yourself in 2, 3, 4, and all 5. These are the diehards. Will you join me in recognizing them with a round of applause? Yeah, I love that poll because it shows the magnitude of of the Great Lakes watershed and just how far Lake Ontario is from the state of Michigan. So, okay, we're going to click through a lot of content here, and as Mike said, have questions later. So the thesis of my talk today is that the Great Lakes region, the North American continent, are all entering a period of increased water tension. Those tensions are primarily driven by water scarcity, and they're expected to put increased pressure on water-rich regions of the world, like the North American Great Lakes. So consequently, the Great Lakes region has created a modern, binding, world-class water management system to protect this globally significant resource as we enter a period of increasing international water tension. And that is the Great Lakes Compact, which bans diversions from the Great Lakes watershed with limited exceptions. We're going to talk about the compact extensively tonight. Excuse me, but first, let's look at the world water picture, which is grim and expected to get grimmer. Yes, there's a lot of water on the grade school globe here, and there's also a lot of tension in water. You can see here for this map published by the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C., all the red is bad, and that includes a lot of red in the United States, which matches the red in the Sahara Desert in terms of severity. So, but only 1% of the water in the surface water on Earth is accessible, drinkable fresh water, just 1%. 800 million people around the world lack access to clean drinking water today. 1,000 children die daily from unhealthy water conditions around the world. Global water demand, according to the United Nations, is expected to surge by 55% by the year 2050, and 2/3 of the global population will be water stressed, according to the UN, by next year. In my opinion, the most egregious example of water mismanagement on the face of the earth has occurred in the Aral Sea watershed. Not a very well-known part of the world here in the United States. You can see we're just north of Iran and Afghanistan there, sandwiched between the countries of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The Aral Sea was once the 4th largest inland body of water in the world, roughly Lake Huron-esque in size. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union embarked on a massive collective agricultural irrigation scheme to divert not the water from the Aral Sea, which is a naturally brackish or salty system, but to the large feeder rivers that fed the Aral Sea, and then send that fresh water out into the Central Asian desert to make the desert bloom for agriculture. And the desert did bloom, but at great cost to the Aral Sea's ecosystem. I traveled the Aral Sea several years ago with a delegation from the Russian Academy of Sciences, and this is a photo of the bottom of the Aral Sea today. At this spot in 1960, the water was 45 to 50 feet deep, a teeming fishery, ferry boats taking people from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan, and fishing trawlers all passing overhead of this spot in 1960. But today, as far as the eye can see, all directions of the compass, no water. Chilling place for a Great Lakes guy to visit. This is a photo of the famous ship graveyard in Munich, Uzbekistan, once one of the largest fishing ports in the former Soviet Union. And the fisherman's gain was, the farmer's gain, was the fisherman's loss. So it now takes 5 hours of driving on the bottom of a former Great Lake to get from Munich, Uzbekistan, the old water's edge, to the new water's edge. That's how far the waters of the Aral Sea have receded. And so the Aral's demise shows that large bodies of water like this are indeed vulnerable to overuse. And so I have a chapter on the Aral Sea in my book about the Great Lakes water diversion issue, not because I'm arguing that this is going to happen here in the Great Lakes region, but rather as a journalist writing a book about the Great Lakes water diversion controversy. Almost every source that I interviewed referred to the Aral Sea as this touchstone that we don't want to have happen here. And yet, to a person, none of them had been to the Aral Sea. And so, as a journalist, I decided if this is the touchstone, that I would write the story of what happened in the Aral Sea and leave it up to the citizens of the Great Lakes region to decide what's relevant between the Aral Sea situation and the situation that we have here in the Great Lakes region. look, this is a desert ecosystem. We don't have a desert ecosystem here. So there's a bit of an apple and an orange thing going on between the Aral Sea and the Great Lakes water diversion controversy. But I came back from my visit to the Aral Sea with this one conviction, that one cannot stand on the shore of a North American Great Lake and argue that it's so large that it's invincible. The Aral Sea situation shows that these large bodies of water are in fact really quite vulnerable, and we need to be careful when we talk about water management issues in a place like the North American Great Lakes. And so then finally, I'm just closing out the Aral Sea section. This is a series of satellite photos taken since 1964, showing that the volume of the Aral Sea has declined by 96% and the surface area by 90%. So again, pretty chilling place to visit. Okay, so that was a quick look at the global water situation. Now we're zeroing in on the North American continent, specifically the lower 48 states, looking at water tension hotspots. We got the Klamath River in southern Oregon, northern California, been a scene of heavy water tension for many years now. California now has a year-round fire season. They've got some relief on the water department side from the atmospheric rivers that have come in lately, but no one in California thinks that they're out of woods. In terms of water scarcity, we have the Colorado River watershed in the Southwest, the most famously oversubscribed watershed in the United States. That amazing, magical river now regularly no longer flows to the sea because of oversubscription. The Rio Grande is a source of continuing tension between the United States and Mexico, even though there's a treaty between the countries over the water in that watershed. The Oglala Aquifer, the largest aquifer in the United States, is down more than 100 feet in many areas and only recharges at about 2 inches per year. And then we have the Apalachicola Flint River Basin in the southeast, where Georgia, Florida, and Alabama have been suing each other for years over water in that watershed. And even the Potomac River was the scene of a Supreme Court case over water several years ago. And then the Ipswich River outside of Boston is known to run dry during the summer lawn watering season. So I don't mean to equate the Ipswich situation with the Colorado River, but if you look at this sort of red circles on this map, from the perspective of the Great Lakes watershed, you can see this arc of water tension on the south side of the Great Lakes watershed. And it is that arc of water tension that tends to drive the Great Lakes water diversion debate, at least in part. And so do massive water diversion schemes like this one, the North American Water and Power Alliance from the early 1960s, otherwise known as NWAPA. The idea here, as fanciful as it may seem today, was seriously put forward by the Ralph M. Parsons Company in Southern California to capture the water in these large Arctic streams in Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories, send that water down to the Rocky Mountain Trench in British Columbia. And then at the time, the Great Lakes were actually going through historic low water levels. So to increase the geographic support for NWAPA, they kicked a little bit of water to the Great Lakes region, but the ultimate goal was to send this Arctic water down to the Southwest, which again, where the Ralph M. Parsons Company was based. Then around the same time, we get a similar but different proposal from Canada called the Grand Canal Proposed Distribution System. It's sort of a NWAPA of Canada, if you will. So you look up at Hudson Bay at the top of the map, and then there's a red line across James Bay in the southeast corner of Hudson Bay. The idea was very similar there, to put a dam where that red line is, and then over time allow the large Arctic streams in northern Canada to turn that James Bay from a saltwater system to a freshwater system, and then canal that water down into northern Lake Huron, thereby making the outflow from Lake Superior and the St. Mary's River superfluous. So we're going to send the volume of the St. Mary's River out the western end of Lake Superior to the Canadian prairies, but again, ultimately down to the American Southwest. Really big, really fanciful. These were just like the ultimate in the dam building era plans in North America. And in the end, they fell under their own fiscal weight and also their environmental weight. I mean, today, these seem quite ridiculous to us, but these were serious proposals, and they had influential backers in both Canada and the United States at the time. And then the fear is they've been shelved, but in some time of crisis, these plans would be pulled off the shelves, dusted off, and at least parts of them might be proposed once again. And it's the Grand Canal proposed distribution system that was so alarming to people in the Great Lakes region. Okay, so we had a quick look at the global water situation, then a quick look at the continental water situation in North America. Now we're zeroing in on my favorite part, the Great Lakes watershed. Obviously, we have the 5 Great Lakes here, and but the the shaded area is the area I want to focus on right here. That is the Great Lakes watershed. Think of it as a soup bowl rim, and rainwater, snowfall, and groundwater recharge that occurs within that soup bowl rim is the secret to water sustainability in the Great Lakes region. And then look, if you will, how far the watershed line is from the shoreline in some areas in the Great Lakes region, and then how remarkably narrow that gap is between the shoreline and the watershed line in other areas of the Great Lakes region. And these areas where the shoreline is closest to the edge of the soup bowl rim are where water tensions are highest in the Great Lakes region. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But first, let's review some really cool Great Lakes stats. 1/5 of all the fresh surface water on the planet is right here in the Great Lakes watershed. That is enough volume to cover the lower 48 states and nearly 10 feet of water, a remarkable statistic. But the key statistic here today is that only 1% of that water is renewed annually through rainfall, snowfall, and groundwater recharge, just 1%. So think of the Great Lakes as a gift from the glaciers 10,000 years ago, this water bank account that is deposited in the heart of the North American continent, and you have this sort of 1% of water interest that flows through that bank account on an annual basis. And of course, the key to water sustainability is we don't want to be consuming more than that 1% of interest and getting into the principle of our water bank account. We're not even close to that yet, but it'll be interesting to see how climate change changes that dynamic as we go forward. Great Lakes nourish 35 to 40 million people in the US and Canada, as well as billions of creatures in a really unique cold water ecosystem. And then this is not very well known. The regional economy in the Great Lakes region, sort of all 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces, the world's 3rd largest economy at $6 trillion, and much, though not all, of that economy is water dependent. Okay, same Great Lakes basin map, but really got a lot of busy orange arrows on it. Each one of those arrows represents an existing water diversion in the Great Lakes watershed already. There's been a lot of human poking and prodding in the soup bowl rim over the last 200 years. Some of those arrows are big, because those are big water diversions. Some of those arrows are givers, because they actually put water into the Great Lakes watershed. Others take water out of the Great Lakes watershed. This is adapted from the map published by the International Joint Commission several years ago. There have been 8 interbasin diversions. Those are diversions that either bring water in from outside the soup bowl rim or put water, take it out or put it in. And then the intra-basin diversions are diversions that artificially pass water from one Great Lake to another, such as the Welland Canal, which bypasses Niagara Falls, allowing saltwater shipping vessels to reach the upper lakes. The biggest, baddest, most controversial Great Lakes water diversion of them all is the Illinois diversion at Chicago, or otherwise just known as the Chicago diversion from 1900. Why is this here? Go back to the late 1800s, the Great Chicago Fire in the 1870s torches much of the downtown area. The city embarked on this massive effort to rebuild itself. It becomes this booming metropolis of 1 million people out on the prairie, and the city is growing so fast that its water infrastructure can't keep up with the demand. And so we have really hard to imagine today the magnitude of the stockyards on the south side of the city. And so you would have all the filth, right, from these animals waiting to be slaughtered, washing into the Chicago River. You had anecdotal evidence of blood from the slaughterhouses turning the Chicago River red. I'm glad this isn't a dinner conversation. And so then we have a situation where sections of the Chicago River would crust over with filth, and chickens and cats would run across that crust. Then you get a big storm event that would flush all that water out of the Chicago River, out into Lake Michigan. Fishermen and boat captains would come inshore and they say there's this grotesque sewage slick that is getting very close to the city's water intake structures, which are still visible today 2 miles offshore. And so Chicago was paranoid that its unsustainable water practices were going to create a major health issue for the city, and there were health issues that came up during this time period. So the city embarks on this massive Panama Canal-like engineering project to lower the grade in the upper stretches of the Chicago River and then connect it to this 26-mile canal that would then take Great Lakes water, reverse it through the city of Chicago, dump it into the Des Plaines River, then the Illinois River, and then the Mississippi River, and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. Its maximum capacity of this canal, Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal, is 6.5 billion gallons per day. It is the most litigated and controversial diversion in the Great Lakes region. It's the longest running active file in the Michigan Attorney General's office. Michigan has been a key litigant in the history of the Chicago diversion from 1900. So here's a photo of the mouth of the Chicago River. If you go, next time you're in Chicago, down the Michigan Avenue Bridge, look down at that water. Normally a big urban stream is brown or gray. Well, this water is blue aquamarine because it's Lake Michigan water going the other way. 2.1 billion gallons of Lake Michigan water flow to the Gulf of Mexico every day through the city of Chicago. According to, and that's set by the Supreme Court in 1967. According to the International Joint Commission, excuse me, this one diversion lowered water levels on Lake Michigan and Huron by 2.5 inches. That may not sound like much, but let me put that into context. I live in Lake Superior, the largest lake by surface area in the world. Lake Huron and Lake Michigan are actually hydrologically considered to be one lake because the gap at the Straits of Mackinac. So their level tends to be the same, and they're considered to be one lake. Together, they have a larger surface area than Lake Superior. So really, Michigan and Huron hydrologically are the largest lake by surface area in the world. And this one diversion lowered their levels by 2.5 inches, according to the International Joint Commission. If this was replicated a half a dozen times, we wouldn't be talking about inches, we'd be talking about feet. And many of you have lived through low water periods here on the Great Lakes, and feet really matter during those low water periods, to the point where the ore freighters that take iron ore from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and the iron mines from northern Minnesota to the steel plants in the southern part of the Great Lakes, like Indiana and Ohio, they will have to remove cargo from their holds during low water periods to get through the shallow connecting channels in the Great Lakes region and to get into ports in some cases. So this isn't just an environmental issue, there's an economic issue here. So the Chicago diversion is seen today as sort of the poster child of bad behavior when it comes to water diversions in the Great Lakes region. Again, that's one of the reasons it's the most litigated, and one of the most litigated water cases in the history of the United States. Okay, so that is a controversial United States water diversion from the beginning of the last century. Now we're going to a controversial water diversion proposal from Canada at the end of the last century. That's the NOVA proposal of 1998. And so what we have here is an unknown consulting firm in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, hatches a plan to ship 158 million gallons of pristine Lake Superior water to Asia annually in tankers. And it could not be stopped by anti-water diversion laws in the United States or Canada. The United States actually had laws to stop that kind of thing, but US laws don't work in Canada, and Canada didn't have laws to stop it. And the lawyers in the United States went to the governors and premiers and said, this is a nightmare legal precedent. If you can send Great Lakes water to Asia, where can't you send it? And something must be done. And so it became enormously controversial. You had politicians in Canada and the United States grandstanding in opposition to the NOVA proposal. The International Joint Commission, which was formed by the federal governments of the United States and Canada, I should have said, to resolve transboundary water disputes all along the US-Canada border, especially in the Great Lakes region. They do a lot of important research about that. They held listening sessions all around the Great Lakes region just to give people in the Great Lakes an opportunity to vent about this very controversial proposal. proposal which raised serious questions about the adequacy of Great Lakes water management laws at the time. So the NOVA proposal brings the entire basin together, the leadership, political leadership of the entire Great Lakes watershed together, including Canada and the United States, and out comes the Great Lakes Compact 7 years later. This is a photo from December 13th, 2005 in Milwaukee. We have Governor Doyle from Wisconsin here, Governor Taft from Ohio, and Premier Dalton McGuinty from Ontario. In fact, one of your local celebrities, Frank Edowagishik, also spoke at this press conference when the compact was released in 2005. But this is just the beginning of the compact story, really, is because at this time, the compact is just a piece of paper. In order for the compact to have the force of law, it has to be adopted by the state legislatures in all Great Lakes states, no small feat, and then it has to be adopted by Congress and signed by the President of the United States. I gave the chances 50-50 at the time, but remarkably, all 8 Great Lakes states adopted the compact in just 3 years, and Congress, a great tribute to the congressional delegation from the Great Lakes region. They were ready. If the states got it there, boom, it went right through the hill really quickly, and President Bush signed it into law on October 3rd, 2008. Ontario adopted a companion agreement in 2007, Quebec in 2009. The tribes and First Nations were consulted throughout this process, and so what we have here is a remarkable bipartisan agreement adopted in the absence of a crisis on behalf of future generations. When is the last time you heard those words stitched together? Truly remarkable. And so today, the compact is a global model for international transboundary water management. Okay, and I just want to show you just how thoughtful the compact process was. We're back to this Great Lakes Basin map, right? And so look at 7 of the 8 state capitals in the Great Lakes region are outside the Great Lakes watershed. The compact bans water diversions outside the watershed with limited exceptions. 7 of the 8, Michigan's fortunate, 99.9% of Michigan is inside the Great Lakes watershed, as many of you may know. But all those other states banned water from the Great Lakes going to their state capitals and all that other part of the state that sits outside the watershed. They cared so much about keeping Great Lakes water from going somewhere else that they denied some of their own citizens access to that water, which the lawyers told them was extremely necessary in order to be able to deny that water going elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to geek out a little bit on some details, but sometimes that's what we have to do with water. Water is complicated. I'm going to talk about some key points. Just bear with me. We'll do it really quickly. Again, the compact is a ban on diversions with limited exceptions. Those limited exceptions include what's called a straddling community. So believe it or not, right, well, first of all, we're in southeast Wisconsin, and that green dotted line is the Great Lakes Basin line. In that area of the watershed where I said it gets really close to the shoreline. And so we have communities that sit on either side of the Great Lakes watershed line. And so the governors created a system whereby those communities could apply to send Great Lakes water to the other side of town, which is all on one plumbing system, and they can apply for those limited diversions if they send the water back, clean it to Clean Water Act standards, et cetera. That was kind of a no-brainer part of the Great Lakes Compact for most people. The more controversial straddling exception was for a straddling county. And so bear with me here. You can see Waukesha County, which is a real case I'm going to talk about in a minute, outlined here. And the basin line straddles the county, the county straddles the basin line. But Waukesha, you can see the city of Waukesha is clean and clear outside the watershed line. Under the straddling county exception, Waukesha, the city, can apply for a limited water diversion. But because it's clean and clear outside the Great Lakes watershed, it needs the approval of all 8 Great Lakes governors. If one governor is not thrilled with the water diversion, it's dead. The straddling community exception just requires the approval of the local governor. And so these exceptions for the Straddling County application are really, really stringent. And no one else, if you're not a straddling community, if you're not a community in a straddling county, you don't have a ticket to the dance. You can't even ask for a Great Lakes water diversion. That was the big change that the Great Lakes Compact brought to the watershed. And so the idea behind the compact is we're going to bring the jobs to the water. We're not going to send the water to jobs somewhere else. And we're reserving the vast majority of the water for the environment, for the lakes and the streams that feed those lakes. Truly remarkable. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about straddling communities here. So here are the requirements they need even to get in the door with their application. They must return the water to the lakes after it's used, cleaning it to Clean Water Act standards, so there's no net loss to the watershed. They have to have a strict water conservation plan because we're not going to send Great Lakes water outside the watershed if you're going to waste it. You have to prove that there's no reasonable water supply alternative. Some people have said that you have to show that Great Lakes water is your last resort. Keep this one in mind. No reasonable water supply alternative. And then you have to prove that if you do this diversion, it's not going to have any adverse environmental impacts. Okay, Waukesha, as I said, is a real case. It's the first major test case of the Great Lakes Compact. In 2010, Waukesha applies for the first, again, Straddling County application. It sits on top a depleted and naturally contaminated groundwater system, contaminated with radium. It was under state and federal pressure to find alternate water sources for the 70,000 people or so who live there. It was extremely controversial. 11,000 comments poured in from all over the Great Lakes watershed, most of them opposed. Yet it was unanimously approved by all 8 Great Lakes governors. Governor Dayton of Minnesota kept us hanging until the absolute last minute. Governor Snyder voted for it. And then the mayors in the Great Lakes region did not like the Waukesha diversion. So we have this historic case where we have the first test of the Great Lakes Compact, and the Great Lakes mayors are squaring off with the Great Lakes governors over the Waukesha water diversion application. They filed a legal appeal against the Waukesha case, the mayors did. They lost that initial appeal and then negotiated an out-of-court settlement over the Waukesha case after that. So really kind of a fraught moment in water management history in the Great Lakes region. All right, I'm done geeking out on the fine print of the Great Lakes Compact here. So where's the water waterfront line in the Great Lakes region? It's in the Chicago, Milwaukee, sometimes called the mega city. And again, it's in that area what I talked about where the watershed line is so close to the basin line. Southeast Wisconsin has more water diversion hotspots than all the other Great Lakes combined, Great Lakes states combined. And then Chicago, we already talked about, the most litigated case. And then down there, even in northern Indiana, there's a city called Lowell, Indiana. I have a chapter there. That's the only place that's ever been denied a Great Lakes water diversion in a prior paradigm before the Great Lakes Compact was passed. Water tensions are expected to increase in this area despite the relative water abundance here. And so, you know, here we are, 15th anniversary for the Great Lakes Compact was celebrated last year. Sort of the take-home points are, overall, the compact is working as expected. The lakes have never been better protected from long-range, large-scale water diversions. It's really an extraordinary success story. The region, nevertheless, needs to remain vigilant to ensure precedents aren't set that are regretted later. Again, southeast Wisconsin has become this new front line in the Great Lakes water war, and so we're going to see more return flow. Again, you have to return the water after it's used. More return flow diversions under the compact applications are inevitable, and that's an anticipated part of the process. I mean, that's one of the reasons that they wrote the compact the way it did. But thanks to years of bipartisan regional groundwork, a system is in place to deal with future water diversion controversies, which is a real service to the people and the environment and industry in our area. Okay, now we're going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to still talk about water diversions, which I continue to follow the water diversion issue since my Water Wars, the second edition of my Water Wars book came out in 2018. And what we're seeing is that the state of Arizona in particular is strongly considering water diversions from the Mississippi River. And Arizona's in a world of hurt. It has the junior water right on the Colorado River, and obviously it's a desert area, and we've seen areas of Phoenix that have had to deny building permits because of a lack of water there, and so they're kind of flailing, and they're looking at this Mississippi River option. The Great Lakes are protected, which is why people are increasingly talking about water diversions from the Mississippi. And so this is the second book I want to talk about tonight, which just came out in November, and it argues that there's only two realistic options left for new water supplies in North America, in particular in many parts of the world. And that is, as one of my sources said, the ocean and the toilet. And a lot of people know about desalination of ocean water, but a lot of people don't know about turning sewage effluent into drinking water, and so that's why I wrote the book about that option. And ironically, surprising to many, the toilet is actually, so sewage effluent is actually a more sustainable water supply option than desalination. It has a smaller carbon footprint and other issues. And so, again, long-range, large-scale diversion shouldn't even be on the table anymore. That's the last century's way of dealing with water scarcity. All right, so, and water recycling, surprising to many people in this room, no doubt, is booming in many parts of the country. Los Angeles has pledged to turn 100% of its sewage effluent into drinking water by 2035. San Diego, 50%. Orange County, California, where more than 2 million people live, already is recycling 100% of its sewage effluent into drinking water. They're tapped out. They don't have any wastewater left to turn into drinking water in Orange County. Texas, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, all investing heavily in potable water recycling as well. These programs, again, are in lieu of water diversions. Lots of global examples about water reuse and water recycling. Namibia has been a real trailblazer, started potable water reuse back in the 1960s. Singapore is also a global leader in potable water recycling. Israel is a leader in using recycled water for agricultural irrigation. But the United States leads the world in potable water recycling. California leads the United States. And as I mentioned, Orange County leads California, making it a global leader in potable water recycling. So I'm going to close here with the mind-bending question that merges both of these water books. As I mentioned, to get a Great Lakes water diversion, you have to prove that you have no reasonable water supply alternatives, right, under the Great Lakes Compact. If it's reasonable in LA and San Diego, in Orange County, and elsewhere to use purified sewage effluent as drinking water, why wouldn't it be considered reasonable in the Great Lakes region? I'm not advocating this, but given the boom in potable water recycling around the country and the world, I think that question is going to come up with the next Waukesha-like straddling county application of the Great Lakes Compact. So I'm just bringing it up now because I think it's going to come up later, and it's a question that regional officials should prepare for in the future. So, wow, you guys are a really attentive audience. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
We're going to start taking some questions now from this very attentive audience. And let's see if we've had this year has been the warmest winter on record. And we're seeing, the least amount of ice in the Great Lakes. So that means evaporation. Is this something that, if we see this trend continuing, are all the efforts to reuse the water we have still going to put us in a really bad situation in the Great Lakes River Basin?
Yeah, so I think that it's a really important question how climate change is going to impact the volume of water that we have in the Great Lakes region. I do have a chapter on climate change and water levels in Great Lakes Water Wars. It's meant to be non-technical and simple, and both the books are meant to be for a non-technical audience. And we have had, what we have seen with climate change especially with water levels in the last 20 years, has been pretty fascinating. So you start in 1999, we start a period of 13 years of historically low water levels. We had really low water levels on Michigan Huron, broke an all-time water level low. Then you remember that polar vortex that came in 2014, covered the watershed in more ice than we've seen in a long time, had really historic low water temperatures. Boom, the lakes shoot back up again, and we had some lakes had never risen so fast, had risen so fast before, and then we went into the 5 wettest years that we ever had in the Great Lakes watershed, and all of a sudden we're dealing with high water, and marinas were struggling, et cetera, et cetera. And so the point of my climate change chapter that examined these different water levels, we had water level lows broken in one decade, then we had water levels high broken the next decade, is that we are entering a period of extremes in the Great Lakes watershed from a climate standpoint. We're having bigger storms. We now in Lake Superior, we have storms that have created sediment plumes that are visible from space. And so we just need to be prepared for these extremes. And to your question, Mike, about what that's going to mean for water quantity in the future, right now the science suggests we're going to have a lot of these highs, we're going to have a lot of these lows, they're going to be rocking and rolling a little bit here, but overall the average water level should remain roughly in its sweet spot overall on an average basis, but we're going to go up and down a lot, and we'll see as this research continues later on in this century if that's where things trend into the future.
We've had some, I've heard other speakers say that the Great Lakes should be sharing in the United States. And, recognizing the Great Lakes Compact is just such a, it's really a remarkable success story. But beyond that, why shouldn't we share? What should we be telling the folks in Arizona? Why shouldn't we share?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not just the United States; it's Canada too, right? And so I think we're happy to share them. Just move here. And I mean, the thing is, right, is that the lakes, the ecosystem of the lakes, is already using the water. Right? The water's not just there for the people, but the ecosystem in the Great Lakes system is using the water. There are some experts who told me in my book there's no extra water to share. And then I have people say, well, we ship oil all over through pipes. Why can't we ship water all over through pipes? And there's a key difference there. Local ecosystems don't depend on oil for their survival. The foundation of the Great Lakes ecosystem is water. And the Great Lake ecosystem depends on that water for its survival, so do the people who live in the Great Lakes region. And so it's a false comparison to compare, technically we can do it, engineering-wise we can do it, but it is not a sustainable alternative. And I think the answer to the people in Arizona, who I have nothing against, right, but it's just conservation. There's a lot of room for conservation, especially in ag. In my research on Purified, I was surprised to learn that the largest commodity produced by the ag industry in Arizona is dairy, followed by beef. I thought it would be vegetables or something else. And so there's just needs number one, more conservation. Number two, the next point of low-hanging fruit is, like I said, water recycling. And then there's desal after that for those communities that live on the ocean, but there's also communities like El Paso, Texas, that's desalinating brackish groundwater and turning that into drinking water as well. So there's a lot of innovation that can be done for alternative water supplies in other parts of the country. And again, the Great Lakes ecosystem is using its Great Lakes water, and that's just not a sustainable approach to go any further. And just think about the carbon footprint of sending all that water uphill to the foothills of the Rockies and then going over the Rockies or through the Rockies, take your pick, right? It's just not a sustainable option.
Okay. Well, here's one from our audience. Let's suppose that the next president does not like the Great Lakes Compact. Can he cancel it or she cancel it?
No. Yeah. So the compact So first of all, a compact has never been thrown out or overruled in the history of the country. I mean, you saw that multi-step process to have a compact be adopted. And the main way the compact could be annulled is if 5 of the 8 Great Lakes states decide they don't want it anymore. That's the main way that the compact could be, the Great Lakes Compact could be annulled. So it's pretty block tight in terms of protecting the Great Lakes. It's an excellent question.
Thank you. This is from one of our online audience. Considering the current availability of fresh water and perhaps more importantly, the potential to recycle sewage into potable water along with desalinization as a technology, does the world have the potential to produce sufficient clean water to service the current and future global population?
Wow, that's quite a question. I think the issue is that, so potable water recycling is definitely a solution, but it's not cheap. And so we're seeing that many of the areas that globally have the greatest water tension are also some of the poorest areas in the world. And so I think a way to help solve the global water crisis is for wealthier countries to help these other countries invest in these technologies as a development strategy. And those are, I think those are the key ways because, and Mike and I have been talking about this over the last couple of days, a lot of the migration that we're seeing of people around the globe is because of a lack of water and a lack of resources. Their ag has not been producing, et cetera. And so it is to, I think, our advantage as stewards and citizens of the world to help these other countries that live in parched areas come up with these new technologies that can help them survive and thrive in the places where they live.
Okay, thank you. We have, by the way, we have a satellite group out in Leland, and this is from someone that's out there watching us tonight online, and it says, the Great Lakes Compact deals with quantitative considerations. Is any comparable work being done with qualitative issues, microplastics and PFAS, for example?
Yeah, you know, when they were negotiating the Great Lakes Compact, there was a thought to do water quality too. And then they were just, it took so long. It took 7 years just to get that document and then 3 more years to get it passed. So they decided to just work on water quantity and save water quality for later. And things like microplastics really weren't an issue like they are today in 2005. So they just stuck with water quantity, and there's a lot of work still to be done in the Great Lakes region on water quality.
Okay, thank you. This is from a student, and there's been a lot of talk about Indigenous peoples' part in the Great Lakes, and you did address some of that there in fact, quite a bit. But the laws being passed here, what has been their past in the Great Lakes conversation, and have their reservations been primarily impacted? And I think that what the student is wanting to talk about is perhaps prior to the Great Lakes Compact and how that impacted our Indigenous communities in both Canada and the United States.
Yeah, so what we're seeing I'm going to talk about the Great Lakes Compact, and Frank Edwagishik talked about this a little bit last night for those of you who were here, is that they first started out, and it was a little bit bumpy in terms of the inclusiveness and the negotiation of the Great Lakes Compact, which Frank talked about last night. And then they kind of got it together, and then they were regularly meeting with the tribes of the United States, First Nations, and Canada throughout each stage of the process. And there was an issue, right, I'm going to have to get a little bit weedy on this too. So tribes are sovereign nations. Sovereign nations need to deal with the federal government. The governors in the Great Lakes region didn't want the federal government involved in the Great Lakes Compact discussions because the federal government represents all 50 states, including those states that might have an interest in diverting Great Lakes water. So there's this really delicate conversation with the tribes. Can we please keep this in the region? Even though you normally interface with the federal government, can we keep this as a regional conversation so we don't get the federal government involved, because it could really complicate what the Great Lakes Compact turns out to be. And so they were regularly briefing, the tribes and First Nations about the compact throughout the process, getting their feedback and input. And as a journalist, I couldn't get in the room. No one was telling me what was going on during that time. And so it is underreported in the book as well, this story. And then there's also the side of it, the tribes had their confidentiality, and do I want to breach that confidentiality when I'm working on my book? So they had a really important voice voice in the process, in my opinion. And as I said, you had two governors, one provincial premier, and Frank Edowagishik, who was presenting on December 13th, 2005 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when the compact was unveiled.
Okay. I'm going to combine two questions because they're related, but you know, outside or inside of the Great Lakes, perhaps, you know, many of us have wells and draw water from aquifers internal to Michigan, and of course, some of us have heard that a lot of the bottled water that is distributed throughout the United States comes as a consequence of pulling that water from local wells, relatively local. So. How likely are these types of water stressors going to affect perhaps local and Michigan water aquifers, do you believe?
Yeah, well, this whole bottled water issue is, you know, this part of the country is a real hot spot in terms of concern about bottled water. And yeah, I mean, the groundwater is a limited resource, right? And I talked about the Ogallala Aquifer, down more than 100 feet in some areas and only recharges a couple inches per year. So there really needs to be a lot of thought into how much water is withdrawn and regulation from some of these aquifer systems in order to protect these systems. And you know, if you are a consumer of bottled water, I think the spring water is the most fragile water out there in terms from an environmental standpoint. And then, you know, if you need to buy bottled water, then, you know, you want to get water that is generally not spring water. Fiji water has the largest carbon footprint of any bottled water, I think, in the world because of how far it has to travel to get here. But there are times when bottled water is necessary. You have emergencies and hurricanes and things like that. So there are, on airplanes, there's no other option for water other than bottled water. So there are reasons for it, but I think we can be smart consumers when we go out to purchase it. And we have to be really protective of these fragile aquifers, especially the water systems that feed cold water trout streams and things like that.
You know, perhaps there should be another audience participation and ask how many of us have drank water out of a rubber hose. This is another good question from a student, and it involves kind of how we use our water locally. You know, we tend to water our lawns with fresh potable water, and how do we convince our communities perhaps to change our status quo practices and perhaps start using more gray water for things that we don't need the highest quality drinking water for?
Yeah, a lot of places are looking into gray water in terms of irrigation, but the water recycling industry is really interested in kind of going beyond gray water and getting those water treatment standards to be not all the way to potable for irrigation, but to get close to potable. And then, but I think really, in many cases, this may be somewhat controversial thing to say, but I think a brown lawn is a status symbol for sustainability in some cases. So not everybody's going to agree with me on that, but water's a precious thing, and I think if you're going to put it on your property, you need to be really good stewards of it, and there is definitely a place for gray water in that.
Moving back to the compact, did the Department of the Interior or the Bureau of Indian Affairs have to sign off on the compact, and did tribal fishing rights treaties intersect it at all in any fashion?
Yeah, and again, so the federal government wasn't involved. That was intentional. And again, the treaties and the rights of the indigenous people, both in the United States and Canada, were consulted, and they had a peer review throughout the process, especially towards the end of the process.
Okay. And then I think we're going to finish up with this final question here. could there be an example of a humanitarian emergency that would allow Great Lakes water versions beyond the straddling counties and skip the requirements that straddling communities and counties need to meet? I mean, can you envision in the future something so egregious that we say, you know what, this trumps everything in the compact?
Liz, you and I were talking about this earlier tonight. So there is another exception clause in the compact, which I haven't talked about, which is emergency humanitarian assistance in time of an emergency. Yeah. So, but it hasn't been super well defined, and so Flo is working on work to help sort of define what that emergency would be and how long it would last and how long that water might be leaving the watershed. So yeah, really impressive question. So it's in there in the fine print, and given the time limitation I had in my talk, I didn't get into it. But so glad it came up in a question.
Well, thank you, Peter. But what we would like to do before you clap and everything, I'd like to give Peter an opportunity for any concluding remarks, things that you just might want to say about kind of what the future holds for us, and you know, you've given us a really good, at least positive example of maybe a best practice that other nations, other states could use. And I'm just wondering if you had any concluding thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, you know, what I like to say in times like this is take a kid down to the Great Lakes and tell them how special it is to live where they live, and that they need to know water, they need to understand water, both in the water-rich regions and the water-poor regions, because it's going to be a really big water century. In my book, I say the last century was a century of oil. You could argue the oil was the most important natural resource of the last 100 years. I think water is going to supplant oil is the most important natural resource of this century, and so it is the children among us who need to know these issues, and they need to be familiar with just how special the Great Lakes are, and that we need to not take them for granted, and we need to follow water conservation here as much as anywhere else. So yeah, again, great audience. Thank you for coming out. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, now, don't worry. You all saw Peter leave, but there's a reason for that. First off, before we get into what is going to happen next, I just wanted to remind all of you that we have another exciting event scheduled for you on May 16th, and the topic is Indigenous sovereignty. And there are a number of questions tonight that related to that, so this is a very natural continuation of some of the things we've been talking about. Since Europeans came to this land, we've had a complicated and often one-sided relationship with the indigenous peoples who have lived here for thousands of years before colonization. We've had a poor record of compliance with the treaties we signed with the tribes and First Nations throughout the United States and Canada. Our responsibilities today go beyond land acknowledgement and include the responsibility to work with the sovereign tribes, respect their culture, and build a better tomorrow for all. So in that thought, to learn more, we're going to be joined by Matthew Fletcher, Professor of Law, University of Michigan, Chief Justice of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, the Poarch Band of Creek Indians, and the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. Our moderator will be IAF board member Mark Wilson. Mark is a member of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, a city council member, and mayor pro tem of Traverse City, Michigan. So if you enjoyed this event, please consider becoming a member of the International Affairs Forum, as we in the Northwestern Michigan College strive to provide multi-generational educational experience. And if you're already a member, thanks for your continued support. Now, Peter is going to be moving to the back as opposed to the way many of the previous speakers have done. So he'll be outside to your right. And the reason for that is because we wanted to offer our members an opportunity to buy and purchase books as courtesy of Brilliant Books, who have come here tonight, set it up, and if something that Peter said really stimulated you and you wanted to learn more, Peter will be out back there. For our students who often like to take selfies and out there, that's where he'll be. So that's how we're going to do it tonight. It's a little bit different. So drive carefully tonight, go forth, and do great things. Thank you.